Good morning, everybody, and welcome to our Wellness for All webinar. Today, we're looking at eating disorder awareness. Sorry, getting my words muddled there. There's no doubt that eating disorders can impact all areas of our lives, and thinking about the domains within our wellness charter not only affect our physical health, but our emotional, our mental health, our social well-being, and extend into the workplace. So what we're going to be looking at in this next hour? Well, it's Eating Disorder Awareness Week, and today we'll learn about the specialist work of a charity called Beat Eating Disorders. We'll hear about the three major types of eating disorders and the help and support that is available for people affected, as well as for their family and friends. So who's joining us as our expert today? Gemma Thielsen's joining us. She's worked in the field of mental health and eating disorders for the last 25 years. Gemma began her career in mental health as a clinician in the NHS and then moved into education in 2012. Gemma has extensive experience as a trainer in the field of mental health, and she works for two national charities, Beat as the Senior Clinical Associate Trainer and also the Charlie Waller Trust. Gemma delivers training in the workplace, but also in settings such as schools, colleges and universities on the area of eating disorders and mental health. So Gemma works with children, young people, parents, carers and professionals in their respective settings. Welcome, Gemma. Thank you for joining us today.
Oh, thank you, everybody, and I'm delighted to be here today to talk through eating disorders and Beat, the National Eating Disorder Charity. It is, in fact, Eating Disorder Awareness Week this week, so it makes it extra more special being able to have the opportunity to deliver this session. So I hope that you find it informative and you take some knowledge and information away. I always say as well, when we're talking about eating disorders, it is and can be an emotive subject. So whilst I'm talking through kind of what we mean by eating disorders, some of the kind of facts and figures, and trying to kind of like challenge some of the myths and misconceptions, please be mindful of your own well-being. And how I like to finish these training sessions and webinars is actually then stopping and pausing and having an opportunity for you to think about things that you can do to look after your well-being, particularly when we've been faced with the pandemic and so much change and uncertainty. And that also resonates for people with lived experience of eating disorders. So I want you to kind of hold on to that as well, and I'll explain what I mean by that. So if you haven't heard of Beat, what I would say is do take a look at our website. We've got lots of really useful information and resources. And I always say, and I've worked in the field, as Tracy was saying, eating disorders for over 25 years now. I learn most from those with lived experience. They offer real insight into the experiences that they have, maybe the reasons why the eating disorder developed, and then equally as well moving forward and recovery from the eating disorder. So the charity was set up very much to kind of champion and raise awareness about eating disorders. And we offer support and guidance and kind of informed policy and kind of thinking about workplace settings as well, around awareness raising and to highlight, because sometimes people don't really understand what eating disorders look like and feel like, a reminder that eating disorders are in fact a serious mental illness. It's really important for us all to be aware that they're complex and multifactorial. So by that, what I mean is each person's experience of an eating disorder are unique to them, the reasons why the eating disorder developed, and also they're complex, because what we do see with the illness is eating disorders don't tend to stand in isolation. And what I mean by that is it could be that the sufferer also has, for example, low mood or depression, anxiety, obsessive compulsive disorder. So it's really important for us to recognise the physical and the emotional effects of an eating disorder. And what we do want to really highlight, and I think that's really important for yourselves listening as well today, because you might have your own experience of eating problems, eating difficulties. You might be supporting a loved one, a family member, friend, child, that eating disorders are treatable and recovery is possible. So we really want to champion and raise that awareness and offer support. So that's our stance. And like I say, please do take a look at our website. So what do we know about eating disorders? And I think this is probably one of the biggest things I just want to kind of remind us all to be aware of and to think about is eating disorders are very much a secret illness. What I mean by that, and this week our focus at BEAT has been around binge eating disorder, where there are lots of myths, misconceptions, and approximately about 1 in 50 of us during our lifespan potentially will be impacted and affected by binge eating disorder. Often lots of kind of internal kind of shame and distress. But the other thing that I would say to you is that we tend to, or we used to, have this kind of perception that eating disorders affected predominantly females, white, potentially from what we would say kind of like middle class backgrounds. The reality is anybody at any age can develop the illness. And one of the most important things to hold on to and remember is on observation, seeing somebody, you wouldn't know that they could be suffering with an eating disorder. So by that, what I mean is people often think eating disorders, you'd see somebody and they'd be maybe really low weight, emaciated. What we actually know is only around 15% of sufferers of eating disorders are low weight. So the majority of people are in either within healthy weight range parameters, or if you think about binge eating disorder, often the distress, because it does result in weight gain as well. So it's very much a secret illness. And unfortunately, the pandemic has almost created this perfect storm, because eating disorders thrive in isolation. And as we all know, the pandemic has brought so many challenges, and what we've seen and the headlines, if you look on the newspapers around eating disorders, are that eating disorders have increased over the last 12 months. And the calls to the BEAT helpline have gone up astronomically, which is a real worry and a real concern as well. So just to remember that we wouldn't necessarily know by seeing and observing somebody that they were living with an eating disorder. And I think in a workplace setting, just for yourselves as well, I always say as well, it could be that you're supporting a loved one, a child who's in the grips of an eating disorder, and that naturally is going to impact on your mental health and well-being as well. So it's really important for us to have that awareness as well. So what I always say, and I suppose this is something I talk about with all mental health conditions as well, but it's around the tip of the iceberg. So what I mean by that, and I think we can just think about for ourselves as well, if we were struggling, would we express or reach out or say to somebody? So what people choose to show us, or we choose to show others, is only the tip of the iceberg. So there's a lot that we can't see going on beneath. And I think that's why it's really important just to open up that understanding and that dialogue and how we can support, but also have a better understanding of eating disorders. So these are some of the facts. I don't know whether you will be surprised or not. I did wonder about doing it as a little quiz, but I decided that I'd just talk you through some of the facts and information. So we currently know But like I say, this is probably only the tip of the iceberg, because lots of people don't reach out, go to their GP, get a formal diagnosis of an eating disorder. But it's estimated that about 1.25 million people in the UK have an eating disorder. What I'd also highlight there, which I think is really important, is that it's estimated that between 4 and 5 million people in the UK are actually affected in some way. So that could be the person that's suffering from an eating disorder, or it could be those around, whether it be a work colleague, it be line manager, family and friends as well. So I would suggest that actually every single one of you listening will know somebody that has an eating disorder, but they might not have shared it with you. And that's why I really want to kind of emphasize the importance of the language and how we talk about eating disorders, which is so important. Like I've said before, it's non-discriminatory, so anyone can develop an eating disorder regardless of age, race, gender, ethnicity and social group. So in my career, I've worked with children as young as 8 that have had a diagnosed eating disorder. And I can remember a time where I worked with a lady who was in her mid-60s, and she developed an eating disorder after bereavement and loss. And if you think about the pandemic and the effects that it's having on people. Now, what we do know, though, is that many eating disorders develop during adolescence. So as a charity before the pandemic, we were doing a lot of work in schools, doing training around spotting the signs, because what we do know with eating disorders is early intervention is absolutely key. The sooner somebody gets that support and treatment, the better the outcomes. One of the things that I don't know whether you're aware of or not, and I think this is really important for us to be aware of as well, it's estimated that about 25% of those affected by eating disorders are men and boys. And I don't know if anybody watched the Freddie Flintoff documentary about his journey and the experiences. And I think, you know, if you can watch that again on iPlayer, it just gives us a real insight and awareness about how difficult and distressing it was. And I think the other thing is that people will often say to me, you know, Gemma, I knew nothing about eating disorders. I actually had an email a couple of days ago. I'd shared an article on social media about binge eating disorder, and somebody contacted me and said, you know, Gemma, I hadn't realised that that was what was going on for me the last 30 years, kind of, you know, my relationship with food and how I manage my emotions. And they said it was almost like a light bulb moment where it just meant that then they had an insight, and it made sense in some ways. So for so many years, kind of keeping it secret and not understanding what was going on. So like I say, it's really important for us to recognise. And we do see that, you know, the percentages. So if we just look at binge eating disorder as an example, it's actually estimated that around 50% of sufferers will be men and boys. So do take a look at the link that I've included. And if you have chance, the Freddie Flintoff documentary is incredibly insightful. So what do we mean by an eating disorder? So it's really important to remember that, like I say, eating disorders are a serious mental illness. And another quite upsetting thing about eating disorders, unfortunately, is it carries so many risks as well. So physical risks within the illness as well. And unfortunately, it does have one of the highest mortality death rates of all mental health conditions. So that's why it's really important to have that awareness and understanding, but also to know where to turn to and what support is available as well. So when we're talking about eating disorders, because often people think it's very much about kind of food and weight, the thing to remember is that the sufferer, yes, they're using food, weight or shape, but they're using it to block out or control difficult thoughts, It can be a means of coping with or expressing emotion. And it's the individual's coping mechanism to manage day-to-day control. I don't have time today, but I always say there, when we talk about coping mechanisms and managing day-to-day, the stress vulnerability model is a really useful thing to have a read about, because actually lots of people have described to me recently everything else feels out of control, and we're facing probably the greatest psychological experiment any of us will live through with the pandemic. And I've heard people say, Gemma, everything else feels as if it's out of control. There's so much uncertainty, so many unknowns, and this is my coping mechanism to manage lots of feelings and emotions. And this is what one father wrote, because like I say, it's really important to kind of try and walk in the shoes and make an understanding of the person living with the illness, but also for those around. And Ian, a parent, described anorexia, terrible and life-threatening though it is, it's often not the core problem, but it's a symptom of other deep-rooted issues. It's the sufferer's way of trying to handle those other underlying issues, feelings of worthlessness, depression and negativity. And a very powerful quote there as well for us to kind of think about as well. So what are the three main eating disorders? There are other eating disorders, I would say, within the workplace, but also kind of away from work. Our role isn't to diagnose, but it's about being able to have a better awareness and understanding and know what support is available. So I'm not going to go into the different eating disorders in detail. You can have a read on the resources section that I've included. But we know that the three main eating disorders are anorexia nervosa. So there you would see that somebody is going to be low weight, lots of physical complications that come along as well. Bulimia nervosa, so that's where somebody may be within healthy weight parameters, but goes through periods of starving themselves and then binging. And I think when we talk or use the word binge, I always just get us to think about, people often kind of say, oh, I've overeaten, I've binged, you know, whereas actually for somebody suffering from bulimia, binge eating disorder, you know, the binges could be thousands and thousands of calories, a real compulsion to meet those needs or to disconnect as well. So I try and encourage people to kind of think about, you know, if you haven't got an eating disorder, how you just talk about your relationship with food, your weight, those sort of things, because somebody might be suffering internally and not shared with you. And then of course, like I say, we've done lots of campaigning this week about binge eating disorder, which, like I say, is estimated that around 1 in 50 adults will be struggling with binge eating disorder. So those are the three eating disorders. And what I want to just highlight is that with all three eating disorders, the thoughts, feelings and psychological makeup are very similar regardless of which eating disorder. So weight change is a symptom and all use food intake, weight or shape as a coping mechanism. So that's what's also really, really important for us to remember and hold on to as well. Now, I think a really useful way to kind of just try and think about what might be going on for somebody who's experiencing eating difficulties, it might be moving towards an eating disorder, they might not have got a diagnosis, been to see their GP, they might have done and got a formal kind of diagnosis of an eating disorder, is what we see for sufferers is where there's lots of big feelings and emotions. And I always say there, you know, each person's experience with an eating disorder is unique. The reasons why the eating disorder developed in the first place, it's not that it's going to be the same for everybody. And what's helpful and the support along the way, again, is going to be different. But what we do know is, and like I said, it is multifactorial, so lots of things that could be impacting. But, you know, those experiences, so at the moment, for some people, they're going through loss, whether it be bereavement because of COVID, they might have lost their job, they might be furloughed, they might be worried about the future, carer responsibilities, whatever it may be. Lots of big feelings and emotions. And I don't know about anybody else, but ultimately then the hardest thing can be reaching out and asking for, or knowing where to get that support, or just feeling very overwhelmed and uncertain and fearful of things. So what happens then is a sense of not feeling that you can cope, don't know how to manage all of those internal feelings and emotions. And then what happens is that the sufferer uses an unhealthy coping mechanism. So that could be undereating, it could be overeating, it could be using excessive exercise, it could be using laxatives, making oneself sick, lots of different things. Now, it might be hard to comprehend, and I always say with eating disorders, sufferers describe it as their best friend and enemy rolled into one. So there's benefits, but there's also costs. So in the moment, it can bring relief. So it works in the short term. But then often what happens is this dialogue of what have I done, which then leads itself to guilt, shame, disgust, anger, all those difficult emotions. So they've already got those big feelings, and then add into it as well the guilt, the shame, disgust and anger, and that keeps the cycle going. So it's just really important to recognise, kind of like I said, with the tip of the iceberg, and then what's going on internally as well. And I don't know if anybody's aware that Fern Cotton has a lived experience of bulimia nervosa. And I think the quotes of sufferers just kind of add some insight and awareness as well. So she described, I didn't feel cool enough, smart enough or good enough. My bulimia was a sort of weird new release. It felt like every worry, every problem, thought was just gone. And it was my go-to thing when I felt out of control. So really important for us to recognise those things. What I would say though, and please hold on to, you know, if you're somebody that, you know, the things that I've talked through resonate, and, you know, I went into the field of eating disorders because I had a sister that was incredibly unwell with anorexia nervosa, and she made a full recovery at a pace that was right for her. And she actually then went into the field of occupational therapy to support others, and that was very much a motivator for her. So what we need to remember is that eating disorders are treatable and recovery is possible. What we know is it's a journey and it's a slow process, and it's always possible regardless of severity. So I've worked with some people that have lived with the illness for 30 years and then made a full recovery as well. And I also say with eating disorders, you know, it might take several attempts. So we say that it isn't a smooth road. What we do know is blips and lapses can be learning opportunities where sufferers gain new skills and insight increased. So I think, you know, within the workplace setting as well, or external to work, just a reminder that I always say, you know, having compassion and understanding and empathy is so important. And then just the things that we do within the work setting, so that it isn't a focus around food or weight, and we try and think about how we can complement others, not based on appearance as well, and just being able to kind of be more kind of like just human and showing an interest in those that we work with or our family members as well, which is really important. And I don't know if anybody's watched, but Brené Brown's video on empathy is a lovely video just to stop and pause and to be able to think about those things as well. And then I think just thinking about whether you're somebody that the things that I've talked through resonate with you in the context of eating disorders, you know, how to manage and support oneself. I always say we can't pour from an empty cup, that oxygen mask analogy. So it's also really important for us to acknowledge kind of where things are for us at this moment in time, and some things that we can think about to look after our mental health and well-being. And as Tracy was saying, our physical health impacts on our mental health and vice versa. So really important. So what I would say is just some brief tips and strategies, and I think things for us to think about. There's been lots of work recently around leavism, and that's very much more challenged now with the way that lots of us have been working from home, is that struggling to switch off, so people doing emails or continuing to work in the evening as well. So what's really important is thinking about our workplace boundaries. There's lots of research if anybody's interested in having more of a read about it, but what's important is taking those regular breaks. I've kind of gone into workplaces where staff have said, I do have a lunch, Gemma, and I'm like, and what do you do at lunchtime? Well, I'll grab something to eat and have my work phone and have my laptop switched on. And ultimately, that's not having that downtime and stepping away from the screen. So trying to think about those boundaries. I'm not saying that it's always possible, but trying to use that 50-minute meeting model so that you do not run end to end. So I think we need to make sure that I finish on time today as well, so that you're not having to move to the next thing. Sometimes it's about limiting your availability, pausing your email inbox. I don't know, some workplaces have WhatsApp groups and 20 messages come through on the evening, and we're tempted and we have a quick look at them, but not switching off. And we always say, and I encourage, not to feel guilty about taking time off when you need it. But within workplace, I think it's really, really important to remember structure, routine and purpose is incredibly important. For some people with an eating disorder, being at work is really, really important. For others, they might need to take a period of time off. Eating disorders can be one episode, they can be ongoing, and they can be fluctuating. And I don't know whether anybody's heard of wellness action plans. So they are evidence-based, evidence-informed, inspired by Mary Ellen Coupland. So I don't know, you might have used RAPs within the workplace. Those are wellness recovery action plans, but very much it's a personalised practical tool that we can use whether or not we have a mental health issue. So I also work for another charity called the Charlie Waller Trust. And last year when we moved into lockdown, we had a look and thought, right, what needs to be out there, some resources. So we have our working from home, your wellbeing action plan that you can download, life after lockdown as well. And that just guides you through thinking about any potential warning signs, and that's inclusive of eating disorders, you know, what support you might need from work, taking breaks, the 5 ways to wellbeing. So it's really helpful. And I always say, don't forget to breathe, as I'm kind of aware of time and looking at the clock. Stop, pause, Gemma. It's really important for us to remember to breathe, and lots of people actually don't breathe correctly. So it sounds obvious, but we need to remember to breathe during difficult times. So if you're supporting a loved one with an eating disorder, you have your own experiences, other things that are going on for you at this moment in time. We also know breathing deeply helps calm our systems down and lowers our heartbeat. Box breathing, you can Google it, is a really helpful thing to use, and that's just about kind of regulating your breathing. And what we do know is through breathing correctly, it increases oxygen, which will give us more energy and mental clarity. And then what I would say for yourselves to remember is, most importantly, any worries or concerns, or you're noticing that you're not feeling particularly well, or you've got a role of supporting somebody with an eating disorder, then of course, you know, it might be a family member, friend or colleague, your line manager or HR. We also talk about GP. That's really, really important, because occasionally people may think that it might be, say, eating disorder, eating difficulties, something, but it could be a physical health condition that's been undiagnosed. And of course, a reminder for yourselves as well, within work, you've got the Access We Care. So that's the replacement from the employee assistant program, and there's a link on the next couple of slides. So just a reminder about what BEAT do. We exist to end the pain and suffering caused by eating disorders. We offer lots of direct support, so be aware that we have helplines that are available every day for young people, for parent and carers. We run a range of support groups as well. There's information about in the workplace as well. We're working for that positive change. So yesterday, unfortunately, some of the comments being said kind of nationally around weight and whatever and obesity, we've really tried to kind of raise the mixed messages and the concerns then if you've got a vulnerability or you're experiencing binge eating disorder, what those messages may convey and how unhelpful that they are as well. So do take a look at our website. We also know that the hardest step for somebody either potentially considering that they may have an eating disorder or wanting to access help is going to see their GP. I don't know if people will be surprised or not, but we've also done a lot of work around kind of training medical staff and GPs, because during their kind of training, some GPs, medics, the maximum amount of time that they get around eating disorders is about an hour. So it's really about kind of raising that awareness and understanding. So we have our seeking treatment for an eating disorder. First step is a GP appointment, if that's helpful for anybody. I've also included links to information sheets and leaflets that are available to download if you want to get some more information and understanding. And if you're worried about a loved one, again, there's some really useful documents and resources and leaflets that you can access from the BEAT website. And then sources of help, just a reminder as well, and we've got the links here. So for example, for BEAT, NHS Every Mind Matters, but also really useful, remember for yourselves, is the link included there for how you can contact We Care. So making sure that you access that support. And another useful website is Hub of Hope. So that's included there. If you go on Hub of Hope and click on the link and put in your postcode, or if you're worried about somebody, it comes up with all the local services and support. So the eating disorder services for young people and adults. It also includes things like Andy's Man Club, which is a support group across the country for men. We do know men are less likely to reach out and talk about their feelings and emotions. So those are really useful websites. Those are the ones that I would say. And we always include, because of financial hardship, things like the National Debt Line and CRUISE if you've been affected by bereavement as well. And then what I would like to say is, I think I've just managed to do it in time, is thank you very much for listening. I do hope that you found this eating disorder awareness session helpful. It might have kind of pricked your mind and wanting to get to know more. Do go, like I say, and have a look on the BEAT website or follow us on social media platform. So now's an opportunity for anybody to either comment, any reflections, any questions. So I'm going to open the room up for anybody that might want to ask anything, and I shall stop and pause.
Thank you, Gemma. There's a lot in there, but it looks like there's a lot of help available to people, so that's really positive as well. And we'll share all those links where you can get more support in our email after the webinar, as we normally do.
Brilliant.
We've got a question come in, if you're okay to take that for us. Brilliant. What's your organisation? I'm assuming they're meaning one of your two charities, but perhaps BEAT. What's your organisation's view on the effects of social media? Should parents try to intervene and stop their children using social media?
Oh, social media is one of those that tends to crop up, eating disorder or general mental health as well. Now, what I would say there, and I'm thinking, so if I'm not looking at the camera, I just kind of to process things. I think a couple of things there. So what I would say is we know, what I would say is social media on its own is not necessarily going to be something negative that affects a young person's mental health well-being, you know, leads or lends to an eating disorder. But if there are already vulnerabilities there, so I tend to give kind of two examples, pros and cons. So if you are a young person who is struggling currently and maybe is feeling quite anxious or worried, does have some difficult relationship with food and weight because of a number of factors, whatever those may be. We definitely also see where there is often low self-esteem. So by that, what I mean is that, you know, it could be that today for a young person, 5 things go well, 1 thing doesn't go to plan, and they hold on to and they hook onto the negatives. So I've worked with some young people where that vulnerability then means that platforms, for example, like Instagram, is that they take numerous selfies and pictures before they upload them, because they analyze every bit of themselves. And that's why I say as adults, we also need to role model as well, you know, and gift our mistakes. So then they upload a picture on Instagram and they will measure whether they are, you know, attractive, accepting of others. You know, I had one young person that said to me, Gemma, if I don't get more than 100 likes, that means that, you know, people don't like me. I need to alter my appearance. I need to think about diet, weight. So what I always say is there would have to be a vulnerability anyway. There are some negatives. There's been lots of work around making sure, because there's pro eating disorder sites, apps that are available. But then on the flip side, and that's why I say it's different for each person, on the flip side, some people will actually say that the social media platform has actually been so helpful for them. So if somebody is sharing helpful advice around recovery, around kind of learning to like oneself, healthy relationships and friendships, you know, really champions kind of recovery, blogs, recordings, then people have said that has been so helpful for me. So I think it's a difficult one. There was a study done, it's called Status of, it was around the effects of social media on young people, and they found mixed findings. So things like compare and despair, fear of missing out, you know, being really hard on oneself. But also there are some positives, because some people use the platforms of Facebook and Instagram and Twitter as examples, going on Beat and reaching out and getting support. So I think it's dependent. I think there are some challenges, but not on its own. And we also know that when a young person is struggling with their mental health, they're likely to spend a lot more time on social media than anybody else as well, anything up to about 3-4 hours. So it can be, I know I'm giving you two sides, because I think there are two. There can be benefits and there can be negatives.
Yeah, thank you for that. I've got a couple of other questions coming in. Thank you everybody for sending in your questions. We've got someone saying, you know, how do you begin that dialogue if you are suffering in order to reach out to a partner or a friend? So if you've got any advice for this person.
Yeah, so when, just to clarify, this is somebody that's struggling reaching out to somebody else, isn't it?
Yes.
Yes. I always say that, and I can really kind of appreciate, I always say to people that the greatest gift given example to me is if somebody shared with me that they were struggling. Taking those steps can be incredibly difficult. Now, examples, I'm just giving some of the examples, is sometimes people will almost kind of signpost to watching or reading something before sharing their own experience, almost to open up that dialogue. So if you think about the Freddie Flintoff documentary, where he opens up and talks about his eating disorder and really describes his experiences and what it feels like, some people have said that that was so helpful because then it allowed to feel more open to have a conversation as well. I think people will use different ways as well. So sometimes it's verbally. I know where sometimes people have said, I just wouldn't even know how to start. So they've written it down, they've sent an email, a text, you know, I just want some time with you. So I think it's about what feels right for you. We've also have where we've got lots of information for supporting a loved one on the Beat website. So I think, you know, it might feel safer because that psychological safety is so important for you if it is something that you're living with and you're wanting to open up to somebody, how to do it. And I think that takes planning and preparing it at a time that feels safe and comfortable for you.
I mean, you know, I'm not an expert in these areas, but we've done a lot of mental health training within the organisation, and you know, I do think people find that if they can just, you know, bravely step over that barrier and tell someone, you know, they do feel a lot better about it themselves. And often the person that you're telling, if it is someone who is a loved one, family or friends, they might have noticed, you know, some things, you know, about yourself and actually feel relieved to know what that might now be.
And
I know it's easier said than done, I know, but
no, and I think that's really important, guys, as well, to hold on to and remember as well, because I also, you know, for the person that asked that question, you know, I always think, you know, think about who feels most comfortable. So sometimes, you know, the people closest to us, maybe in our own environment or own home, might not be the ones. So, you know, I had somebody actually that sent me a message. They are a relative, I don't live with them, a relative that after reading about binge eating disorder kind of approached me. Now they haven't as yet approached their partner, but they're processing it and you're thinking about it. And I always say, you know, for somebody worried about somebody, it's really important to ask those questions and to revisit. And for the person that's thinking about, you know, kind of sharing with somebody something that's going on, you know, often our gut, I don't know about anybody else, we get a sense anyway, don't we? I get a sense that maybe things aren't okay for somebody. So, you know, I think planning it, thinking about how you want to do it. It doesn't have to be face to face. Like I say, people use different ways to communicate and express how they're feeling as well. But it does. I did some line manager training for a company in London, and it was interesting. I showed a video. This was about anxiety. So a good day and a bad day with anxiety. And one of the managers actually asked at the end and said, you know, are you going to show that at every training? Because their husband, also a manager, she felt he didn't quite understand it. So she said that would be really useful. So that's why I was saying not just the Freddie Flintoff video, there's loads of things happening this week. You know, sharing something can be a helpful way to open up that dialogue.
Okay, thank you. Just a question here around, you know, do we think this is, you know, something that's more prevalent at the moment? Or is it that, you know, actually the world has become a place where, you know, we do share more now around these types of issues?
Yeah, and I think that is a really, really interesting and really good question in the context of, so I'll just give you as a kind of sense with eating disorders as an example. So when I first started working for Beat, which was, I think it was about 6 years ago, the figures that were kind of being shared about kind of prevalence within the UK we're around 725,000, and I've just said today, we're more likely 1.25 million, but that's just the tip of the iceberg. I think it is a hard one because are more people reaching out or others connecting in with them? So I think, a lot of the barriers, say 20 years ago, stigma and misunderstanding, so people not getting a diagnosis. So I think it is a hard one to know, is it that figures have increased because more people are feeling more comfortable to talk about and to reach out? Or is there some trend? So what I would say is I think the coming couple of years, the research and evidence will be interesting because we've seen a real increase in eating disorders in the UK, quite concerning, worrying figures. And like I say, you just need to put in your search eating disorders and it will come up with all those headlines. The Beat Call Centre, helpline has received astronomical numbers. Now, is it because there's increase or people are now knowing where to reach for help, the importance of seeing their GP, recognising that an eating disorder is a serious mental illness? So yeah, I always say take figures just with a pinch of salt as well, because it'll be hard to unpick and know. But we also do see, even with studies, for example, when we're looking at anxiety and self-harm and eating disorders during teenage years, diagnosis has just increased and increased and increased. But is that because we're taking more of a proactive approach? Doesn't take away from kind of challenges, waiting times as well.
Just a question around sort of children, and someone here with a child who, has put on some weight during the last year, which is understandable. We've been locked in our homes for a year. And, any advice on, how they can sort of help with that without actually, starting a chain of events that might not be a good one? What do we say to our children? How do we get that balance between healthy eating and, should they know that they, need to lose some weight, or should we, just moderate their diet without them realizing? Some advice around that if you've got any for this.
Yeah. Lovely. So what I always tend to kind of say is the ways that we kind of like communicate and the things. So one of the things that I always say, and we encourage, we kind of really try to, as a charity, think about kind of the negatives of things like in primary school being weighed, those sort of things. It's really difficult, but I try to kind of get to think about kind of, positive mental health and well-being for our children. And what we know is, yes, a balanced diet, but I always say any food in moderation. So rather than it being healthy and unhealthy food groups. So as long as it's kind of that they're getting their fruit, they're getting their fibre, their protein, their carbs, but not to really just kind of not have too much of a focus, but really encouraging around, a healthy approach to diet and exercise. So if you think about it, the last year, lockdown and homeschooling, lots of the time being spent in front of a screen. I feel sorry for the kids in some ways, 5-6 hours. Now they're going back into the school environment. As soon as they're back at school, their energy expenditure anyway is going to increase. And more around healthy eating, and just making sure that the kind of ways that we communicate things are helpful rather than it may be creating something. But we all parent and care in different ways, but I always say balanced diet rather than kind of good foods and bad foods, any food in moderation, Exercise is really important. We know around 30 minutes to 60 minutes a day. The kids will soon get back to, you know, doing exercise and being at school and being more active, and just being mindful as well around the language that we use. There was something else, but it's unfortunately popped out of my head, so I am trying to think. Yeah, and I always just get to think about, you know, our children and young people having a toolkit to look after their mental health and well-being. So by that, sleep, don't underestimate the importance of sleep, because that can also affect a balanced diet, exercise, having fun, so important, and reaching out and asking for help if need be. But on the Beat website, there are lots of things for parent and carers, and I'd also say for anybody listening, do also look at the Charlie Waller website, because we've got loads of resources for parent and carers and young people as well.
Fantastic. Thank you for answering all our questions there, Gemma, joining us today. Yeah, there's some real helpful advice in there. Certainly, you know, resonating with me, the healthy versus unhealthy. I think sometimes we might often slip into that mode. So I'm going to sort of rein my normal approach to that in and adjust things around that moving forward. So thank you for that. Let's have a look at what we've got for our wellness webinar next week. So next week we're looking at doing something aligned to National No Smoking Day. We'll be here at 10 o'clock, our normal time, and we'll be looking at giving up smoking with Louise Ross from an organisation called Smoke Free. And this webinar will be helpful if you're someone who is a smoker and are thinking about giving up, or actually thinking about supporting a friend or a family member who might want to do so, or perhaps who's tried and failed before. We're also thinking, working with Anthony at the moment, around whether actually we might be able to get a cohort of people who perhaps might want to be a support group to each other in thinking about giving up smoking. So if that's something that you would be interested in being involved with and getting some support through Louise, then do let us know either before next week or after next week's webinar. In the meantime, thank you, Gemma, for joining us. Thank you for all the advice that you've given. And thank you for everyone for those really great questions. Thank you.